ACL. You've probably heard it quite a lot recently, particularly if you follow women's football even just a little bit. In the past 2 years, some of the best players in the world, at the best clubs in the world, have dropped like flies. 37 international players were absent from the World Cup in 2023, and at one stage, 5 of the top 20 Ballon d'Or nominees were all out of action at the exact same time with the exact same injury. In fact, just 4 days prior to this video release, Dutch international and Manchester City's record signing Jill Rood became the latest high-profile casualty. The anterior cruciate ligament is a thick, powerful ligament in the knee, and whilst the ACL may be pretty small, the impact of damaging it isn't. For footballers who are constantly moving, changing speed and direction, kicking a ball and sliding into tackles, any injury involving the leg is devastating. An ACL injury, however, is particularly debilitating. It hurts, a lot. It may be difficult to walk, some movements may be impossible, and you may not even be able to bear any weight on the leg at all. It can take a long time to heal, and may even require surgery. Depending on the severity, an ACL injury can keep a player off the field for 6 to 12 months, with a lengthy recovery period. That can be an entire season gone in the blink of an eye. It can be a recurring injury. Isokinetic London, who specialise in sport injuries, say that 40% of those who tear their ACL will do so again within the next 5 years. The toll a painful and reoccurring injury can take not just on the body, but on the mental health of those players, can be massive. This fear of injury can prevent players from ever being comfortable on the field again. It may impact future performances. 30 years ago, this injury could very well have ended a career instantly, and whilst there may not be many studies for the impact an ACL injury has on football players, studies from Major League Baseball and the NFL seem to suggest that players who recover and return from ACL injuries often do so with worse performances than prior to their injury. And football can be cruel. For female players in particular, even those at the highest level are often handed short-term deals, so the prospect of your contract running out whilst you're suffering an injury is a very real one. Football waits for no one, and teams have to keep playing. Some players recover, only to have a difficult time getting back into the first team, either due to their own fitness, team needs, or the performances of their replacement. An older player, one with a reoccurring injury problem, or someone whose performances have suffered post-injury may find their entire career is now at risk. Non-contact injuries account for about 2/3 of all ACL injuries. This means it's not usually a crunching or bone-breaking tackle that causes the injury. Instead, it's more likely to be something small, something simple, a sudden change of direction, speed, or a misstep, for example. But do female footballers really suffer more ACL injuries than men? The short answer is yes, and the slightly longer answer is that research shows they're anywhere from 2 to 8 times more likely. The most commonly suggested reason is anatomical differences. Women have a wider pelvis, and this puts more stress on the soft tissue in the knee. They also generally have less muscle mass around their knees, which can cause more instability. Women are often quad-dominant, which means their quadricep muscles are stronger than their hamstring muscles. Whilst having strong quads is beneficial, a weak hamstring can also jeopardize the stability of the knee. Women also house a narrower groove that the ACL travels through in the femur and have a smaller ACL. When women jump, they tend to bend their hips and knees less than men and, therefore, land harder and more flat-footed. This means women don't absorb the shock as well, so the likelihood of injury is higher. So is it all bad news? Well, not quite, but if you're thinking that women are just naturally predisposed to this type of injury and it simply cannot be prevented, well, you aren't alone. A small study from Duke University in 2018, however, suggests that despite all the differences in bone structure, muscle mass, hormones, and bone size, men and women still tear their ACL in the exact same way. So whatever differences do exist may not be quite as important as we think. and the British Journal of Sports Medicine seemed to agree. They theorized in 2021 that it was something else: sexism. Well, not quite, but they do say that the cause of ACL injuries could be far deeper, much more historical, and more culturally influenced than simply how women jump and land. Strength training, for example, is believed to reduce the risk of suffering an ACL injury, and the British Journal of Sports Medicine say that girls and women participate in resistance training at a much lower rate than boys and men, and say this gap is associated with strong gendered expectations of how a woman's body is supposed to look, and the gender stereotyping of strength exercises as masculine. So could it really be that easy? Is it just that women aren't training in a way that prevents it? Maybe. But what if we're all just overthinking it? Is it simply the case that women have an increasingly busy schedule, and matches are becoming more competitive, and this has brought an increased risk of injury? This has already been considered too. As women's football has grown more popular, and FIFA attempts to capitalize on recent interest, it has resulted in, or the suggestion of, more games. A Women's Club World Cup has already been confirmed, but there have also been proposals to increase the number of Olympic teams, a brand new Europa League-style competition, and a biannual World Cup. FIFPro looked at the workload of 139 players in the leading women's leagues in Europe, including 58 who were injured at least once during the 2022-23 season. The results indicated that elite female footballers who injured their ACL were exposed to a higher number of matches, lower amount of rest time, and a higher number of rest periods of less than 5 days between matches than non-injured players. But what about male players? It could be that a busy schedule takes a larger toll on a woman's body, but the heavily congested schedule of men's football has been a talking point for a number of years. Despite an, at times, incredible number of games, and each at a very high and intense level, the ACL epidemic has just never quite hit to the same extent. Well, if it's not just body structure or more games, what else could it be? Details are sparse on the next one, but the menstrual cycle has long been suggested to have an impact on the performance of female athletes. And this, it seems, also extends to the injury rate. Over a 4-year period, injuries from England international footballers at training camps or matches were recorded, alongside self-reported information on menstrual cycle characteristics at the point of injury. Injury incident rates showed that muscle and tendon injuries were 88% greater at a certain stage of the cycle, with muscle ruptures, tears, strains, cramps, and tendon injuries or ruptures, in particular, occurring more often. Destigmatization of the menstrual cycle to allow for better tracking, and further detailed research into exactly what impact it has on high-performing athletes at different stages could be beneficial to injury prevention. But this isn't going to solve everything, and it probably won't solve the ACL injury specifically. Are there any other contributing factors? Whilst we may not know the specific or primary cause of an ACL injury, we do know that football was not made for women, and it has largely failed to adapt to their involvement. For example, big brand boot companies have only started to produce a boot specifically designed for women in the last year or so. You may not think that's significant, but we've already established that men and women are different. They play differently, walk and run differently, land differently, are built differently, and, generally, are just different. Football boots are designed for men. They fail to accommodate the fact that women's heels, feet, and arches are different. Wearing boots that don't fit can cause blisters, which isn't quite an ACL injury, but the lack of protection and support in the right areas of the feet may be causing more injuries than it otherwise would, including the big ones, like the ACL. The appropriateness of stud length is also a relevant topic when it comes to women's footwear. Studs are typically created with male weight, bulk, movement, and traction in mind, but again, women have distinct physical differences that aren't accounted for. Their running style, as well as the distribution of pressure and weight, often differ from men in ways that aren't necessarily reflected in the style of boot. Resources. The disparity between resources becomes much more prominent the further away from the top divisions and closer to grassroots that you find yourself, but even women at the highest level oftentimes find themselves playing at questionable grounds. It is important to note, however, that there are male players who use the exact same grounds, yet do not suffer ACL injuries at the same rate. So, whilst improvements to the playing surfaces would surely be welcomed, it's unlikely to be the sole or even primary factor in the heightened risk women face. So, what can we do? The reality is that we don't really know for sure what causes ACL injuries in women to occur at a higher rate, but the Union of European Football Associations hopes to find out. The new plan from the European governing body is a recommendation from its recently established health expert panel. A group comprising of internationally renowned experts and researchers has been set up to look into the high prevalence of such injuries in women's football. It aims to produce a consensus for an ACL injury prevention and management plan by summer 2024. We will never be able to completely prevent any injury, but with further study and research, and as the women's game continues to grow, we may be able to minimize the risk of this devastating injury and protect the next generation of girls.